Hello, my name is Niels Pfleging. Today I would like to talk to you about a book that I only recently discovered, even if it's almost 20 years old. I read it within a day or so, and I thought I should share this recommendation with you. So the book I'm talking about is by an author called Donald G. Reinertsen from the United States, and the book is called The Principles of Product Development Flow, second generation lean product development. It's a book that was published in 2009. So now we are in 2016. It's 17 years old. Not exactly a new book. Don't ask me why it took me such a long time to find it and to read it. I'm not quite sure. It is an important book, I think, about time orientation, which is why I'm recommending it to you. Now, this is a book that has, I recommend it. I think you should read it and use it in your work, but it has some downsides. And I would like to talk about the things that I loved about the book and the things that I disliked about the book a little bit. Yeah. So here's the thing. Why do I think this book is important? In the English language, there are not so many books that can be used to share with other people, that can be used to be shared and to discuss time orientation and to understand why time orientation is so much better than capacity orientation. And this book does something very interesting, even though it doesn't use the term capacity orientation, or it doesn't kind of correctly debunk all of capacity orientation. It does a great job at debunking many artifacts of that. For example, queues or batch processing. So Donald Reinertsen dedicates quite a few pages to why queues do not work, what to do instead, how to create flow instead of batch processing with all the queues and inventories and so on. And it's interesting that Mr. Reinertsen, I would describe him as a man who thinks of himself as highly rational. Yes, so he writes for the rational reader, who of course doesn't really exist. He tries to make his book as rational as possible. Just to give you an idea, he divides his book into more than 100 principles of flow, as he calls them. He gave most of these principles have terrible names, but he identified these, I think, 120 principles or so in his book and goes through them one by one. A few about queues. Why are queues bad? Why is batch processing bad? What are good principles that work and what is opposed to them? This structure is both I think, enticing and boring. Yeah, and it leads to, as Mr. Reinertsen opens the field, detailing the concepts of time orientation versus capacity orientation into these 120 principles. He becomes a little bit repetitive over time. Yeah, so this is a book that you may not read it in full, but it's very useful still. Because you get a lot of the concepts. I think he calls it theory, which isn't always appropriate, but he kind of he uses graphics, illustrations, and logic to make us understand why current ways of thinking, current ways of organizing do not work, lead to queues and batches, delays, waste of all kinds, and so on. So it's a wonderful book to debunk all those things. By the way, what I appreciate a lot about this book is that Mr. Reinertsen even addresses decentralization quite well, shortly, but in a crisp way, but he addresses it in several of these principles, little chapters. And he even addresses stuff like relative targets, which I think is wonderful. So he addresses why teams are important in terms of decentralization. He addresses why relative targets, he calls them, I think, moving targets, are important instead of fixed targets. Mr. Reinertsen does a wonderful job in criticizing stuff that I have long criticized, like the theory of constraints, which he compliments Mr. Goldratt for having advocated it, but he calls it superficial and kind of sloppy, I think. So Mr. Reinertsen addresses all the right things. The structure, you may find it a little exhausting over time, throughout the book. But the book is certainly, it gives people a rational, I think, to think systematically about time orientation, and that's a great thing. That's noble pursuit, and it's very important. And there are great little paragraphs in this book. For example, as for he calls it the batch sized first principle. He calls it, that's principle B21. You already noticed that it's an annoying book. Why does he create 120 principles and then gives them different sections, like B in this case, and in the section B this is principle 21. But okay, the beautiful sentence here is, however, the practical answer to the batch size first principle is much simpler. Start with batch sizes. If you want to change your system, start with batch sizes. This is the great lesson from the Toyota production system. The 100-fold improvement in manufacturing cycle times was not achieved by finding bottlenecks and adding capacity to the bottlenecks. It was achieved by reducing batch size. Period. Very simple, very well addressed. It explains very well, I think, this kind of sentence. And some of these nuggets, many of these nuggets are in the book, explains very well why something like the theory of constraints will never get you to a time-oriented system. It will always fall short of delivering transformational or producing transformational power. Here's something about decentralization. Decentralization is a logical response to unpredictable situations where response time is important. This occurs in product development, where problems can expand quickly and opportunities can be perishable. Counterbalancing the response time benefits of decentralization are the efficiency benefits of centralized control. Here I might disagree a bit, but the next sentence is good. Centralized control creates scale economies and more efficient alignment on our efforts. Mr. Reinertsen doesn't mean centralization, of course, but agreement, standardization, and that kind of joint principles and stuff. So there are, as you can see, remarkable ideas. It makes a great argument for decentralization, for rationality in organization. Now here's what there are some downsides to this book. Mr. Reinertsen, he does a few interesting things. For example, a few times in this book, Mr. Reinertsen he claims that Toyota does FIFO processing. Yeah, first in, first out. An order comes in, and then it goes directly into the production queue, and the sequence of incoming orders is the sequence of outcoming cars. And I stopped counting at a certain point how often this is repeated in this book. I think it's mentioned at least 5 times in this book that Toyota is doing FIFO processing, which is not true. Yeah, it hasn't been true for decades. I think it has never been true, because as every decent lean expert in the world knows, Toyota doesn't FIFO, first in, first out processing. They do Heijunka, or leveling, which is a technique that mixes incoming orders in a way so that the resource usage becomes leveled, so that bottlenecks are avoided. Heijunka, or leveling, has been well known in lean circles for many, many decades. I think since the 1980s, at least. So to claim in a book from 2009 that Toyota does FIFO processing is just sloppy. Yeah, of course, it's kind of fraudulent to say something like that, because it's just wrong. Everybody knows, everybody with some understanding of Toyota production system knows that this is wrong, that Toyota invented Heijunka, which is exactly a way of mixing production, sticking with, order incoming should be close to order outcoming, or order processing, but not exactly the same, to level demand of resources so that you do not produce unnecessary bottlenecks. Now, why does Mr. Reinertsen, who is so adamant about, who cares so much for rationality, and I love this about this author, about the man, I watched some videos of his, very remarkable man, a super useful book, I think, especially if you want to convince managers of time orientation and want to get them to, adopt a flow system, adopt a lean system. So how can Mr. Reinertsen be so so careless to make claims about the Toyota production system that are wrong. And I thought about this hard while reading the book, and my answer to you is Mr. Reinertsen just doesn't care about production and manufacturing. He hates it. This book is about product development. Mr. Reinertsen loves product development. He has built a career on product development, but apparently he couldn't care less. He doesn't give a hoot about manufacturing or production, which is why he's not interested. He doesn't know much about it. Yeah. And his book, I think it would be a much better book if it cared about production, manufacturing, industrial production, large scale, small scale, customized, production. It would benefit from having a broader scope, but it doesn't. Mr. Reinertsen chooses to make this book about product development. You should know that if you want to read the book, if you want to enjoy it, be aware that this has a certain scope. It's an odd book, or it's you might also say it's odd that Mr. Reinertsen didn't write a follow-up on production system, but again, he doesn't seem to care. So this is a book that has some great pieces in it. I recommend it to use it with executives, to put it in their hands and say, look, Mr. Manager, look, Mr. CEO, look, Miss CEO, Mr. CEO, dear chief executive, you should read this book to understand and convince yourself that capacity orientation is a zombie approach to organizing. We need to go time oriented. Read this fascinating, very rational book. Nobody will read it completely, but it makes a super convincing case of everything time oriented. So thank you, Mr. Reinertsen. I hope that we will record a podcast episode with him soon, where we will probably discuss the whole scope of the book if we can. I will try to contact him in brief. If you are interested in other books about time orientation, here's the classic that I already recommended in another episode of this little video series. George Stark Jr. and Thomas M. Hout, Competing Against Time, the 1990s classic on time orientation. Maybe the first significant book about time-oriented competition that was ever published, that became bestseller in the 1990s. It has changed the world in that way. Another recommendation that I would like to repeat is Getting and Staying Productive, Applying Swift Even Flow to Practice, a book by the wonderful Roger W. Schmenner. His work is fantastic. I love this man. He wrote beautiful academic articles. This book is loaded with advice on how to become time-oriented. I think these two books make a wonderful combination. So George W. Schmenner, Getting and Staying Productive, an academic who really knows how to address practical problems. Wonderful book. Or take Rajan Zuri's It's About Time, the inventor of quick response manufacturing. Also a very good book to complement with Mr. Reinertsen's book. It's About Time, the competitive advantage of quick response manufacturing. Great book by Rajan Zuri. I hope to record a podcast episode with him at some point, and somebody who has already been a guest on the podcast that I run with Reinertsen. Lean RFS, Repetitive Flexible Supply, Putting the Pieces Together by Ian Fraser Glenday and Rick Sather. And as some of you know, Lean RFS is an amazing approach to time orientation in industry and manufacturing, just as quick response manufacturing. So these are excellent books. And here's the big news. The last recommendation, these were 5 books already that I recommend, but I have to recommend another one. I just finished work on the first book by Ernst Weichselbaum in English. It's called What Would Ernst Weichselbaum Do? I just finished editing it. It will be released in April 2026, so in just a few weeks. A wonderful book of quotes with 160 quotes that I edited over the last month. I put it together from the German sources available about Ernst Weichselbaum, but nothing, almost close to nothing that's in this book has been translated before. So this is really new. It's how can I say that? Ernst Weichselbaum is the prophet and the chief philosopher practitioner of time orientation. Much of what Mr. Reinertsen tries to debunk here on, in ways that are technical and logical, Ernst Weichselbaum uses logic as well, of course, but he comes from a more poetic, philosophical direction. Mr. Weichselbaum, Ernst Weichselbaum, and I worked with him for a few years. I knew him well. I edited his first book in German. Now I'm editing his book. He passed away a little over a year at the end of 2024. Now I'm editing his first book. His It's the condensed version of his Weichselbaum system in English. This is a dummy copy. And Mr. Weichselbaum, Ernst Weichselbaum, he achieved, putting these things not into a huge set of principles that are hard to read, hard to figure out, like in some of these more technical books that I just recommended. But Ernst Weichselbaum puts it into very condensed little almost aphorisms or little quotes that are so delightful, counterintuitive, and you have to really make sense of them. And it will change your mind just to work through it. This is a small book, compared with Mr. Reinertsen books. It's even smaller. This is not such a thick book, but it has a lot of content to read. This is much thinner. Still, it will give you the whole thing about why capacity orientation doesn't work, how to produce flow in organizations. And Weichselbaum talks mainly about production, industrial production, manufacturing, and so on. But these principles are translatable for stuff like software development, as we have done with time-oriented software development. It's translatable to all kinds of industries, to services, and so on. So you will benefit from this book. Now, available for pre-orders everywhere in the internet, on all the websites. So pre-order it now, get your copy in April, delivered to you, or buy a package. On the Red 42 website, you can already purchase the book, pre-order it in volume. Trust me if I tell you, this will change your life. Thank you very much for listening. Please read Donald Reinertsen's book, The Principles of Product Development Flow, second generation lean product development. Useful book, useful to convince people, not to convince, but to get them into thinking about time orientation and to abandon capacity orientation. Get the book by Ernst Weichselbaum and these other books I recommended, and see you again very soon.